The boy stood motionless, staring at the collapsed roof and crumbling walls that once sheltered his family. Wind whistled through broken windows as autumn leaves scattered across the cabin floor. Everything was gone now. His parents, his siblings, even the livestock. All that remained were memories and ruins. With calloused hands that seemed too young for such weathering, he picked up a splintered beam and studied it. The mountains loomed silently, indifferent, yet somehow watching. He had no plans, no blueprint, just raw determination burning in his eyes. Could a child truly rebuild what skilled men had originally constructed? What if the wilderness was not his enemy, but his greatest teacher? The leather-bound journal lay half-buried beneath splintered floorboards, its edges charred but contents largely intact. The boy wiped away soot and gently opened it, revealing his father's neat handwriting and detailed sketches of the original cabin construction. He traced the diagrams with his fingertip, memories flooding back of summer afternoons, watching his father work, learning the names of tools, the properties of different woods. "You see how these joints fit together," his father had said. "That's craftsmanship. Something made right stands the test of time." Night was approaching fast. The nearest town lay 3 days' journey through mountain passes. Neighbors? None for miles. Relatives? All back east. Strangers he'd never met. The boy closed the journal and looked around at the scattered remnants of his childhood. The decision crystallized without conscious thought. He would stay and rebuild. Not because he had no options, but because this broken place was the last connection to everything he had loved. He gathered salvageable tools from the ruins, his father's hand plane with the oak handle, a rusted saw that would need cleaning, a hammer missing its leather grip. Working until darkness made it impossible, he arranged the tools carefully on a flat stone, a ritual that brought odd comfort. The first night, he slept under a lean-to fashioned from fallen pine branches and the tattered remains of a wagon cover. The stars wheeled overhead, impossibly bright in the mountain air. He tried not to think about the empty spaces where his family should be. Instead, he focused on the worn journal now tucked inside his shirt, close to his heart. Dawn brought clarity and purpose. The boy methodically sorted through the cabin ruins, creating piles, usable wood, salvageable nails, stones from the collapsed chimney. His father's voice seemed to guide his hands. "Waste not, want not. Everything has a purpose if you're clever enough see it." By midday, he had uncovered a small miracle. His father's toolbox had survived beneath a fallen beam that had created a protective pocket. Though the wooden box itself was crushed, the contents were largely intact. Chisels, an auger, several files, and a folding rule. Tools meant for a man's hands, not a boy's, but he would adapt. The discovery felt like permission, like his father was saying, "Go on, son, build it back." He worked until his hands blistered, then kept working. When hunger gnawed, he ate the last of the jerky from his pocket. Tomorrow he would need to set snares, find food, but today was for claiming this place again. As sunset painted the mountain ridges gold, he sat on a stone and opened the journal again. His father had written not just about construction, but about this land, this particular valley with its distinctive seasons and moods. Notes about where to find the best clay for chinking, which slopes held the straightest pines, how deep to dig the foundation to resist spring flooding. "The mountain provides," his father had written. "You just need eyes to see and hands willing to work." The boy nodded to himself. He would need both. That night, he slept fitfully beneath his makeshift shelter, journal clutched to his chest like a talisman. In his dreams, his mother sang while hanging laundry, his sister chased chickens in the yard, and his father stood in the doorway of a cabin not yet broken, nodding approval at something just beginning. Morning came with heavy dew and birdsong. The boy rose, muscles aching, and studied the ruins with new eyes, not as a monument to loss, but as the beginning of something else. Something he would build with his own 2 hands, guided by his father's journal and whatever the mountain would teach him. He would start with a proper shelter, something to keep him dry while he worked on the larger project. Then the foundation, deeper this time, better anchored against the whims of mountain weather. The journal showed him how. Before beginning, he placed his hand on the earth, where his family home had stood. No words, just a silent promise. Then he picked up his father's hammer, its weight both foreign and familiar in his grip, and got to work. The cedar branch felt solid in his hands, heavier than it looked. His father's tools worked for cutting and shaping, but he needed something of his own making. A mallet first. The journal showed designs for one. Simple, functional, essential for work ahead. He selected wood carefully, remembering his father's lessons. Cedar resists rot, good for outdoor work. Using his father's knife, he stripped bark and began shaping the head, awkward at first, then with growing confidence. His hands, still small but strengthening daily, worked the wood until blisters formed and broke. By afternoon, he had crafted a crude but serviceable mallet. The handle fit his grip perfectly, because he'd made it for himself, not for a man's larger hands. He ran his fingers over the smooth cedar, feeling a strange pride. This was the first thing he had created entirely alone. First steps, he whispered to himself, testing the mallet's weight with a practice swing. The boy turned his attention to the cabin ruins. Methodically, he began clearing debris, using the mallet to break apart sections too damaged to salvage. Each piece required judgment, keep or discard. The usable lumber he stacked carefully. Nails he straightened with patient hammer taps. Window glass, what little remained unbroken, he wrapped in cloth and stored safely. A deer appeared at the forest edge, watching his work with liquid eyes. They regarded each other for a long moment before the animal bounded away. The boy felt less alone knowing other creatures shared this clearing. Midway through sorting a pile of roofing shingles, he uncovered a mouse nest. Tiny pink bodies squirmed blindly as the mother darted away. Instead of destroying it, he carefully replaced the covering material, creating a small shelter around the nest. "Room enough for all of us," he murmured. As shadows lengthened, a problem emerged. His temporary shelter wouldn't survive a heavy rain. Dark clouds gathered over the western peaks, promising exactly that. Working quickly, he arranged salvaged boards to create a small lean-to against a standing section of wall, covering it with the wagon tarp. Not beautiful, but it would keep him dry. The first drops fell as he crawled inside with the journal and his day's findings, a rusted hinge, a handful of usable nails, and his new mallet. Rain drummed steadily on the tarp as he studied his father's drawings by the light of a small fire sheltered beneath his makeshift roof. Morning revealed a blessing, a natural spring, not 50 yards from the cabin site, half hidden by ferns. Clean water burbled from between rocks, forming a small pool before trickling downhill. The boy drank deeply, the cold water sharp in his throat. One essential need solved, without effort. He spent the morning creating a proper workstation, dragging flat stones to form a table of sorts. Upon this surface, he began organizing tools and materials. The journal recommended a specific order of work: clear the site completely, salvage what could be used, prepare the foundation, gather new materials. He would follow this wisdom. By midday, his stomach growled fiercely. The jerky was gone, and he needed food. Setting aside his tools, he fashioned a simple snare from cord found in his father's toolbox. His father had taught him trapping basics during winter hunts. Now those lessons meant survival. Setting the snare along a game trail, the boy returned to his work. The ruined cabin needed to be completely dismantled before rebuilding could begin. Piece by piece, he deconstructed what remained, learning the secrets of its construction in reverse. A particularly stubborn beam required his full strength. Straining against it, his hand slipped and a jagged nail raked his palm. Blood welled immediately. The boy sat back, examining the cut with detached curiosity rather than panic. Not too deep, but painful. He remembered his mother's remedy, yarrow leaves to stop bleeding. Finding the feathery plant growing nearby was another small blessing. As dusk approached, he checked his snare and found a rabbit caught. The killing was quick, a necessity rather than cruelty. That night, he cooked his first self-caught meal over a small fire, the mallet resting beside him, like a companion. His palm throbbed beneath its yarrow poultice, but there was satisfaction in the day's progress. After eating, the boy walked the perimeter of the cleared foundation space, visualizing the cabin that would stand there. His cabin now. The enormity of the task ahead should have overwhelmed him, but instead, he felt a quiet determination. Each small step, the mallet, the workstation, the cleared space, brought the vision closer to reality. That night, he added his own earth note to his father's journal. Made cedar mallet. Today. Works well. Foundation clearing begun. From beneath a charred floorboard, the boy extracted a weathered wooden stick, notched with generations of measurements. His grandfather's measuring stick, marked with the growth of children, the width of boards, the depth of foundation. Some notches were labeled with faded initials and dates going back decades. The boy ran his fingers over the marks, connecting to a lineage of builders. He placed the stick against the cleared earth, where the new foundation would begin. According to his father's journal, the original foundation hadn't been deep enough to withstand spring flooding. This time would be different. Measure twice, cut once, his grandfather used to say. The boy had never fully understood the importance until now, when every resource was precious and mistakes costly. Using the notched stick, he marked the perimeter of his future home, slightly smaller than the original, but better positioned on higher ground. Digging began at dawn. The earth was rocky, resistant to his efforts. By midday, his hands were blistered despite the gloves he'd fashioned from old leather. Just one corner of the foundation trench completed, and already his muscles screamed in protest. Too slow, he muttered, looking at the sun's position. At this rate, winter would arrive before the foundation was finished. The solution came while resting beside the spring. Watching water carve its path through soil, he realized nature had tools he could borrow. He diverted a small stream to soften the earth where he needed to dig, returning the following day to find his work significantly eased. Even with this clever assistance, the foundation trenches took weeks. Each day ended with aching arms and a deeper respect for his father's strength. But slowly, deliberately, the outline of his home emerged in negative space, trenches waiting to be filled with stone. The nearby stream held smooth river rocks perfect for building. Transporting them became his next challenge. The largest rocks required ingenuity, a makeshift sledge of branches lashed together with strips of hide, pulled with ropes of braided plant fibers. Each stone's journey from stream to foundation was a victory of persistence over weight. On the day he positioned the cornerstone, a massive flat rock his father would have struggled to move alone, the boy gashed his leg on a hidden branch. Blood soaked through his tattered pant leg, the pain sharp and immediate. For the first time since beginning his project, fear gripped him. Alone, injured, miles from help, the vulnerability of his situation crashed over him like a wave. Limping to the spring, he washed the wound carefully, remembering his mother's lessons about infection. The cut needed stitching, but he had neither needle nor thread. Improvisation came in the form of thorns from a locust tree and thin, strong fibers from inner tree bark. The self-administered stitches were crude but effective, sewing together both flesh and resolve. That night, fever came. Shivering beneath his makeshift shelter, the boy drifted between consciousness and strange dreams where his family helped him lay stones, their hands guiding his, their voices encouraging. By morning, the fever had broken, leaving him weak but determined. He crawled to continue his work, placing stones while seated, unwilling to lose a day. As the foundation took shape, he discovered a rhythm to the labor. Place a stone. Check alignment with the measuring stick. Adjust. mix mud and smaller stones for filling gaps, move to the next section. The repetitive nature of the work allowed his mind to wander, processing grief in measured doses between focused tasks. When the first frost silvered the ground, the foundation was nearly complete, deeper than the original, reinforced with angled supports against the slope, designed to channel spring runoff away rather than underneath. His grandfather's measuring stick confirmed every corner was square, every wall perfectly straight. On the day he placed the final foundation stone, the boy slept within the rectangular outline under clear autumn stars. The stone floor was hard beneath his blanket, but there was profound satisfaction in resting within the boundaries of what would become his home. That night, he dreamt not of loss but of raising walls, of a roof against rain, of windows framing mountain views. The foundation beneath him seemed to hum with possibility. In the morning, frost had etched delicate patterns across the stones, as if nature itself had decorated his work. He added a new entry to his father's journal: "Foundation complete. Grandfather's measuring stick kept me honest. Tomorrow, begin gathering timber for walls." The measuring stick he placed carefully in his tool collection, now an essential part of his building heritage, rather than just a family relic. In its notches lay not just measurements, but connections, to those who had built before him and to what he would build now, alone but carrying their knowledge. The intricately carved wooden whistle appeared without warning on the foundation cornerstone one morning. The boy approached it cautiously, scanning the surrounding forest. Someone, had been here while he slept. The whistle was beautifully crafted from dark walnut, polished to a soft sheen by practiced hands. Its good craftsmanship, came a gravelly voice from behind him, should carry sound nearly a mile in these mountains. The boy spun around, heart hammering. An old man stood at the edge of the clearing, leaning on a gnarled walking stick. His beard hung white and wild to his chest, and his clothes were patched but clean. A leather pack sagged from one shoulder. "No need for alarm, boy. If I meant harm, I wouldn't have announced myself." The old man gestured toward the whistle. "That's for emergencies. 3 short blasts. I'll hear it from my cabin across the valley." The boy's silence stretched between them, rusty from disuse. "Not much for talking, are you? That's fine. Mountains teach a man the value of quiet." The hermit approached slowly, eyes assessing the foundation work. "Your father did good teaching you. This foundation's built right, better than the original." At the mention of his father, the boy found his voice. "You knew him? Knew your whole family? Helped your grandfather build the first cabin on this spot, 30 years ago?" The old man crouched, running weathered fingers along the stonework. "I've kept my distance, watching you work these past weeks. Figured you'd either give up and head for town, or prove you were mountain stock." A rare smile creased his face. "Seems you've proved it." That afternoon, they sat together on flat stones near the foundation, sharing a simple meal of rabbit stew the hermit had brought. The boy learned the old man's name was Elias, though most in the region just called him the mountain hermit. He'd been a friend to 3 generations of the boy's family. "That pine you're eyeing for your support beams," Elias gestured toward a stand of trees the boy had been considering, "won't serve you well. Too much sap, too young. You want the cedars on the eastern slope. Straight grain, naturally resistant to rot." The boy listened intently as Elias explained the properties of different woods: cedar for exterior siding, oak for structural posts, pine for interior walls if properly dried. The knowledge filled gaps in his father's journal, expanding his understanding of the materials the mountain offered. "How did you learn all this?" the boy finally asked. Elias gazed toward distant peaks. "Same way you're learning now. Necessity, observation, and a few hard lessons." He produced a small leather pouch from his pack and spread out an array of wood samples. "See the grain pattern here? That tells you how the wood will behave when it seasons." For hours, the old man shared knowledge accumulated over decades of mountain living. The boy absorbed it all, occasionally consulting his father's journal to make notes. When the light began to fade, Elias repacked his samples and rose stiffly. I won't intrude on your project. A man builds his own home in his own way. He adjusted his pack, but I'm just over that ridge, if the whistle blows. The boy fingered the carved whistle. Why help me? Elias's eyes crinkled. Your grandfather helped me once, when I had nothing. Mountain folk pay debts forward, not back. He turned to leave, then paused. Besides, it does my heart good to see these old skills passed down. Too much forgotten in this world. As the hermit disappeared into the forest, the boy felt the weight of solitude lift slightly. Not gone. He was still alone in his daily work, but different, connected to something larger than himself. That evening, as darkness claimed the valley, the boy practiced a simple melody on the whistle. The clear notes bounced off distant slopes, returning as echoes. For the first time since beginning his project, he felt something close to contentment. The next morning, he found another gift left silently in the night, a small book identifying trees and their uses, with pressed samples of leaves and bark. Inside the cover, a simple inscription, "The mountain provides. You must learn to see." He added the book to his father's journal, the whistle to his belt, and set off toward the eastern slope, where the cedars grew. The foundation was complete. Now he needed to understand the forest, not as a place of wilderness and danger, but as a storehouse of materials, waiting to be recognized. That night, sitting beside his fire, the boy played a soft tune on the whistle. Whether as thanks or simple practice, he couldn't have said, but somehow, he felt certain that across the valley, the old hermit was listening, nodding approval at sounds carrying through clear mountain air. His hands worked steadily, wrapping the leather binding around the handle of his newest creation. The stream-polished stone head, painstakingly shaped over days, was secured firmly to the hardwood shaft. The boy held up the finished axe, testing its balance. Not as refined as a blacksmith's work, but a vast improvement over his earlier attempt. This tool would give him the means to truly begin. Elias had shown him where to find the right stone, a section of the stream where the water had exposed a vein of particularly dense rock. The mountain people before us used stones like these, the old man had explained. They knew metal was a luxury, but a good stone axe would serve most needs. The boy had spent days finding the perfect stone, then more days carefully chipping and grinding it to shape, using progressively finer rock. The edge wasn't razor-sharp like steel, but it had surprising cutting power when properly swung. Now the real work could begin. Following Elias's guidance, he identified mature cedars with straight grain and minimal knots. For each tree he circled it first, studying its lean, planning its fall. His father had taught him to respect what he harvested, to thank the forest for its offering. The boy maintained this ritual, placing his hand on each trunk before making the first cut. The stone axe required different techniques than metal. Rather than deep, straight cuts, he worked in a circular pattern around the trunk, gradually deepening the groove. The work was slow, but the rhythm of it became meditative. Swing, shift position, swing again. Wood chips scattered at his feet, filling the air with fresh cedar scent. His first successful felling sent a surge of triumph through him. The tree crashed exactly where he'd planned, missing the foundation and splitting naturally along the grain. The boy stood transfixed, sweat cooling on his brow, hardly believing he'd done it alone. But dropping trees was only the beginning. Each log needed trimming, hauling, and proper storage for seasoning. Here his size became a challenge. Even the smaller logs outweighed him significantly. Through frustrating trial and error, he developed a system of rollers made from straight branches, using leverage where muscle failed. For days he worked, felling trees from sunrise until his arms trembled with exhaustion. Each night he collapsed beside his fire, adding notes to his growing journal by flickering light. Diagrams of his hauling system, observations about different wood types, calculations of lumber needed. His handwriting, once childish, grew more assured with each entry. The pile of logs grew steadily beside the foundation. Following Elias's instructions, he stacked them with spacers to allow air circulation, covering the pile with a lean-to of branches to keep off the worst rain. Some wood could be used green, but most needed months drying to prevent warping. "You're working against winter," Elias remarked during one of his infrequent visits. "First snow usually falls before the hunter's moon." The boy nodded, eyeing the distant peaks where clouds already gathered more frequently. He'd felt the change in the air, mornings growing crisp, afternoons shorter. Time was becoming as precious a resource as good timber. His body changed with the labor. Muscles developed across his shoulders and back. Hands once soft became calloused and strong. He grew leaner, but tougher, able to work longer hours without rest. Occasional glances at his reflection in the spring revealed a face changing too. Baby fat, melting away, jaw more defined, eyes holding a confidence born of accomplishment. As his pile of lumber grew, so did his understanding of the forest. He learned to read the trees, to see which were perfect for his needs and which to leave standing. He discovered the satisfaction of skilled work, how the right cut with the right tool created something useful from raw material. One evening, sprawled exhausted by his fire, he realized he'd gone a full day without thinking of his loss. The pain hadn't vanished, but it had transformed, becoming part of the landscape rather than consuming it. Like the trees he harvested, grief too could be shaped into something constructive. The first autumn rain caught him splitting logs. Rather than seek shelter, he continued working, letting the cool water sluice down his face, plastering his hair to his forehead. The stone axe rose and fell, its wet handle secure in his grip. Something about working through the discomfort felt right, a reminder that nature's challenges couldn't stop him now. Later, drying by his fire, he added a new entry to his journal. "Rain came today. Worked through it. 23 logs split for wall supports. Stone axe holding well. Need to begin cutting joinery before ground freezes." Outside, the lumber pile stood covered, but substantial, a physical testament to his persistence. In the morning he would begin the precision work of cutting joints, but tonight he allowed himself rare satisfaction, running calloused fingers over the smooth handle of the stone axe that had made it all possible. The first snowflakes fell like tiny messengers of change, dancing on cold air currents before settling on the foundation stones. The boy watched them dissolve against the rock, knowing more would follow. He carefully rolled up the sheet of birch bark on which he'd been drawing, tucking it into his shirt to protect it from the increasing snowfall. Upon this natural parchment, detailed cabin plans had emerged over days of careful work, measurements, joint details, window placements, all rendered in charcoal from his fire. By nightfall, 3 inches of snow blanketed the clearing. Work on the exterior structure would have to wait. The boy retreated to his improvised shelter, a triangular lean-to built within the foundation walls, insulated with pine boughs and moss. Inside, a small fire provided just enough warmth to keep the worst chill at bay. His breath clouded in the firelight as he unrolled the birch bark blueprint, weighing its corners with small stones. Winter had arrived faster than expected. His carefully stacked lumber lay beneath tarps of woven branches and bark, seasoning through the cold month. The foundation was complete, but walls and roof remained aspirational lines on bark. He was caught between seasons, between destruction and creation. "Prepare or perish," his father used to say about mountain winters. The boy took stock of his situation with clear eyes. Food would become scarce. His snares had yielded less game, as animals prepared for hibernation. He needed a winter strategy. Elias appeared the next morning, materializing through swirling snow like a spirit. He carried a bundle wrapped in oiled cloth. "Winter comes early this year," the hermit observed, passing the bundle to the boy. Inside lay 3 steel traps, precious metal tools the boy couldn't have crafted himself. "These will catch larger game. More meat for less effort." The old man surveyed the boy's shelter with critical eyes. "Your foundation work is good, but this won't keep you alive through deep winter." He nodded toward the stacked lumber. "We have a week before heavy snow, enough time to get 4 walls up if we work together." It was the first time Elias had offered direct help, rather than just knowledge. The boy recognized the significance. Winter in the mountains was not to be faced unprepared. For 7 days they worked from first light until darkness forced them to stop. The hermit taught as they built, sharing techniques passed down through generations of mountain people. Together they raised corner posts, secured crossbeams, fitted wall sections. The boy's smaller size proved advantageous for certain tasks, allowing him to climb and balance where Elias's age limited him. By the time heavier snow began to fall, a rudimentary structure stood atop the foundation, 4 walls, and the beginnings of a roof. Not the finished cabin of the boy's blueprint, but enough to survive in. Elias helped him stretch oiled hides across the roof frame, creating a temporary covering that would shed snow until proper shingles could be made in spring. "It'll hold," the old man said as they viewed their work. "Not pretty, but it'll hold." When Elias departed, trudging back across the snow-covered valley to his own cabin, the boy felt the silence settle around him like a physical presence. Winter had arrived in earnest, bringing isolation more complete than he'd yet experienced. The first weeks passed in a rhythm dictated by necessity. Morning meant checking traps, gathering firewood, melting snow for water. Afternoons he spent refining his plans by firelight, making detailed drawings of joints and fittings he would cut when weather permitted. At night, huddled in furs near his small fire, he added to his growing journal observations about winter, sketches of animal tracks, notes on the cabin's progress. One evening, unable to sleep despite exhaustion, he carved a small notch in a roof beam. The next night, another. The marks became a calendar of sorts, tracking days that otherwise blended together in winter's monotony. Dreams came vivid in the long nights. His family appeared often, his mother's hands guiding his, as he practiced knots, his father's voice explaining how timbers should fit, his sister's laugh as they raced through summer meadows. He woke from these dreams with tears freezing on his cheeks, yet they brought comfort too, as if his family visited through memories, checking his progress. The solstice arrived with the winter's deepest cold. Following mountain tradition he'd learned from his father, the boy stayed awake through the longest night, keeping his fire fed, marking the annual moment when darkness began to recede and days slowly lengthened. It was a night for reflection. By firelight, he studied his snow-crusted blueprint, fingers tracing the lines of the home that would be not just a shelter, but a continuation. His family's legacy, transformed through his own hands. The cabin on the birch bark was more elaborate than the simple structure he currently inhabited. It had proper windows, a stone hearth, a porch facing the valley. It represented not just survival, but a future beyond grief. As dawn lightened the eastern sky, the boy added a new notch to his beam calendar. Then beside it he carefully carved a sun symbol, marking not just the passage of time, but a turning point. The darkest day was behind him now. Light would return, gradually but certainly, bringing with it the chance to continue building. The creak and groan of shifting timber filled the clearing as the wall frame rose against the pale spring sky. Months of planning, cutting, and fitting joints had culminated in this moment. The boy strained against the weight, muscles burning, feet braced against melting snow and muddy earth. This first true wall, not the temporary winter shelter, but a permanent section of his home, seemed to hesitate, wavering between falling back and standing tall. "Steady now," he whispered to himself, to the wood, to the watching mountains. With a final heave, the frame locked into place, mortise and tenon joints sliding home with satisfying precision. The wall stood. For a long moment he simply stared at it, this vertical testament to survival. Winter had tested him with bitter cold, with hunger, with isolation so profound he'd sometimes spoken aloud, just to hear a human voice. But he had endured, and now, with snowmelt feeding rushing streams and the first green buds appearing on valley trees, he was building again. The ritual came to him without conscious thought. His father had performed it when raising the original cabin, a tradition from grandfather and beyond. The boy broke a small branch from a nearby pine, tied it with a strip of hide to the top beam, and bowed his head briefly. "New growth," he murmured, the words feeling strange on his seldom-used voice. "New beginning." By midday, he had secured the wall frame properly, bracing it with temporary supports, while he prepared the next section. The work proceeded more efficiently now. Winter evenings spent carving joints by firelight had given him not just prepared materials, but improved skills. His hands knew the wood in ways they hadn't before. While gathering more timber from his carefully stacked supply, a flash of green caught his eye. Near the ruins of his mother's garden, tiny seedlings pushed through the soil, volunteer plants from last year's unharvested crops. Kneeling, he identified the familiar shapes of early bean sprouts and what might become summer squash. His mother's garden, returning without human intervention. The discovery affected him deeply. He had been so focused on building shelter that he'd forgotten other aspects of home. The garden had been his mother's domain. Each spring she would work the soil, singing softly as she planted rows of vegetables and herbs. This small patch of returning green connected him to her in ways the cabin construction connected him to his father. Carefully, he cleared debris around the seedlings, marking the area with stones so he wouldn't accidentally trample the new growth. Later, he would expand it properly, but for now, this volunteer garden deserved protection. Returning to his wall construction with renewed energy, the boy worked until dusk. Progress was visible now, the first wall complete, the second begun. His winter blueprint was becoming reality, timber by timber. The crash from the forest edge startled him from sleep before dawn. Grabbing his knife, he crept from his shelter, heart pounding. In the grey pre-morning light, he made out the massive shape of a black bear and two cubs investigating his lumber pile. The mother bear stood on hind legs, sniffing the air, clearly aware of his presence. Fear froze him momentarily. Bears emerging from winter hunger were unpredictable, and a mother with cubs doubly so. His father's rifle had been lost in the cabin destruction, leaving him effectively defenseless against such a creature. The mother bear dropped to all fours, woofing softly to her cubs. Rather than charging, she simply led them in a wide circle around the cabin site, occasionally glancing toward the boy with what seemed like cautious curiosity rather than aggression. Within minutes they had disappeared, back into the trees, leaving only scattered debris from the lumber pile. The encounter left the boy shaken, but thoughtful. This was their mountain too. His father had spoken of respect for the bears, giving them wide berth in spring, when hunger made them bold. Perhaps there was room enough for both his project and the bear family, if boundaries were observed. That day, while raising the second wall, he found himself doing something unexpected, humming. The tune was one his mother had often sung while working in her garden, something about spring planting and new beginnings. The melody came rustily at first, then with growing confidence. By evening, with two walls secured and braced, he caught himself singing actual words, voice echoing off the nearby slopes. The sound startled him into silence. How long had it been since he'd sung? Since before the loss, certainly. Yet here it was, returning unbidden like the seedlings in his mother's garden. That night, making notes in his journal by firelight, he added something new, not just construction details and progress metrics, but a feeling. Raised first, true wall today. Saw mother's garden returning, sang her planting song. The cabin is becoming something more than shelter. Outside his winter-worn temporary structure, the two standing walls cast long shadows in the moonlight, frames of what would soon be home. not just a place to survive, but to live again. Like the seedlings pushing through cold soil toward light, something within him was growing too. The smooth river stone fit perfectly in his palm, cool and dense with possibility. Unlike the rounded stones he'd used for the foundation, this one had a natural edge, almost like a blade. For weeks, he'd been struggling with the finer woodworking needed for window frames and door jambs. His handmade tools, effective for rough work, lacked the precision for detailed cuts and carving. Following directions in his father's journal, the boy had journeyed downstream to where the mountain river widened, depositing stones of particular quality. The trip took most of a day, farther than he'd ventured since beginning his project. Walking along unfamiliar stretches of the river, he felt both exhilarated and uneasy, like a creature that had strayed from its territory. The journal had described exactly what to look for: flat stones with consistent grain, certain colors indicating hardness. After hours of searching, testing, discarding, he'd collected 7 promising specimens. This one, with its natural cutting edge, seemed especially valuable. Back at his work site, he spent a full day carefully shaping the stone into a chisel. Using increasingly finer stones for grinding, he worked the edge until it could shave curls from a pine branch. The handle he fashioned from deer antler, secured with pine resin and wrapped in leather. The first test exceeded his expectations. The stone chisel bit cleanly into wood, allowing him to shape joints with new precision. Details that had been impossible now became achievable. Window frames, door jambs, decorative elements, all suddenly within reach. Progress accelerated with this new tool. By late spring, all 4 walls stood properly framed, with spaces for 2 windows and a door. The boy worked methodically, following his winter blueprints, but adapting when practical experience suggested improvements. The morning the rains began, he was using his stone chisel to carve decorative notching on a support beam. At first, just a gentle patter on the temporary roof. By midday, a steady downpour that darkened the sky to twilight. Still, inside his partially completed structure, he remained relatively dry, focused on his carving. The roar reached him before the water, a sound like distant thunder that grew rapidly closer. Stepping outside, he saw the spring-swollen river had breached its banks upstream. A wall of debris-laden water rushed down the valley, uprooting saplings and reshaping the landscape in its path. For one paralyzing moment, he thought the flood would destroy everything: his foundation, his walls, his months of work. Then he remembered his father's wisdom in choosing this spot, on a slight rise well above the normal floodplain. The water would pass by, close but grabbing essential tools and his journals. He retreated to the highest ground nearby, watching as the flood surged through the lower valley. His cabin site remained a safe island, but barely. Water lapped at the edge of his foundation, testing his engineering. The flood receded nearly as quickly as it had risen, leaving behind a transformed landscape and an unexpected bounty. Among the debris deposited across the valley floor were treasures: whole trees uprooted upstream, some already seasoned by time, sections of milled lumber that might have come from bridges or structures miles away, even a bundle of tools, rusted but salvageable, caught in a tangle of branches. "The river gives and takes," Elias said, appearing as he often did when least expected. Together they surveyed the aftermath. "Looks like she gave generously this time." For 2 days the boy salvaged what the flood had delivered. The unexpected lumber accelerated his timeline considerably. Some pieces required only minimal preparation before use, already shaped by human hands before the river claimed them. The salvaged tools, an auger, several nails and a hand saw missing half its teeth, were cleaned and added to his growing collection. Most valuable was a long, straight pine that had been deposited almost at his doorstep. Perfectly seasoned, it would serve as the main ridge beam for his roof, a piece he had been concerned about harvesting and moving alone. "River did the hard part for you," Elias observed, helping him strip the bark, cutting it, dragging it, just dropped it right where you need it. That evening, making notes in his journal by firelight, the boy reflected on how destruction and creation seemed intertwined in mountain life. The flood that might have destroyed his work had instead advanced it. The river that threatened had ultimately provided. With his stone chisel, he began carving a simple design into the salvaged ridge beam, flowing lines that suggested water, movement, continuity, not merely functional but beautiful. The work went late into the night, his new tool allowing precision his hands had previously lacked. In the morning light, he studied the carved beam with satisfaction. The flood had reminded him of nature's power, but his response was not fear. It was adaptation, integration. He was learning to see opportunity where others might see only threat. Near his foundation, he placed a special stone from the river as a marker of this lesson. Then he returned to his work, the ridge beam waiting to be raised, the stone chisel cool and capable in his hand, the cabin growing more refined with each cut, each carved line, each day of patient labor. Sunlight streamed through the newly framed window opening, casting a perfect golden rectangle across the dirt floor. The boy stepped back to admire his work, a window frame meticulously fitted and secured in the eastern wall. Unlike the crude openings of his winter shelter, this was crafted with care, joints dovetailed, edges smoothed by patient work with his stone tools. Around the window frame, he had packed a mixture of local clay and grass, an ancient technique Elias had taught him. The clay would dry hard as stone, sealing gaps against wind and rain. Running his fingers along the seal, the boy felt a surge of satisfaction. All four walls now stood complete, defining the space that would become his home. "Good work," came Elias's voice from the doorway. The hermit entered, ducking slightly through the opening that would eventually hold a door. "Proper windows change everything. Brings the outside in, on your terms." The old man carried a small bundle wrapped in leaves. "Brought you something." Inside lay a collection of seeds, beans, squash, and herbs. "For your mother's garden patch. Those volunteer plants you found need companions." Together they worked the small garden area that afternoon, the boy following Elias's instructions on proper spacing and depth. The work was different from building, gentler, more nurturing, but connected to the same purpose of creating home. "Your mother had a way with growing things," Elias remarked, patting soil around a seedling. "Used to trade her herbs for my honey. Said mountain herbs had stronger medicine than valley-grown." These casual mentions of his family no longer brought sharp pain. Instead, they felt like stitches connecting his present to his past, weaving a continuous story rather than one brutally severed. With the garden planted, they returned to cabin work. The next challenge was creating coverings for the window openings. Glass was impossible, but Elias had solutions. Stretched hide works for winter, lets in light but keeps out cold. For summer, oiled cloth gives better airflow. From his pack, the hermit produced a small jar of oil, rendered from bear fat. "This'll make cloth nearly waterproof. Your father used to trade me pelts for it." Learning to stretch and prepare hides for the windows required new skills. The boy's first attempts tore or stretched unevenly. Patiently, Elias demonstrated the proper techniques, soaking, scraping, stretching gradually on a wooden frame. By the third try, the boy produced a serviceable window covering, thin enough to let light filter through while keeping out insects and light rain. "You're learning faster now," Elias observed. "Hands remember what mind forgets." That evening, after the hermit had departed for his own cabin across the valley, the boy sat inside his structure, watching sunlight fade through the new window covering. For the first time, the space felt enclosed, defined, not just posts and beams, but walls that separated inside from outside, creating a distinct place that was his alone. He slept that night within the framed walls, under the stars still visible through the open roof space. The summer air was warm, filled with the scent of pine and the distant song of a whippoorwill. Before sleep took him, he realized he had gone the entire day without thinking of himself as alone or lost. Instead, he had simply been a builder, a planter, a creator. Morning light through the eastern window woke him gently. The translucent hide covering diffused the sunlight into a soft glow that illuminated dust motes, dancing in the air. Outside, birds called their territories and challenges. Within his walls, a new day of building waited. The roof became his focus. Using the flood-delivered ridge beam, he created a simple gable design. Raising the heavy beam required all his ingenuity, a system of ropes and counterweights that allowed him to gradually inch the timber into place. Elias had offered help, but something in the boy needed to do this himself, to solve the problem with his own mind and muscles. When the ridge beam finally settled into its notches atop the wall frames, he allowed himself a rare whoop of triumph, the sound echoing across the valley. The hardest part was done. From here, the roof rafters would be lighter, more manageable pieces. That night, he added to his journal by firelight. Ridge beam raised today, window frames complete with clay ceiling, first time sleeping inside four walls. Can see stars through roof opening, but not for much longer. Summer's long days allowed extended work hours. As June mellowed into July, the cabin transformed visibly with each passing day. Roof rafters took shape, extending from ridge beam to walls like the ribs of some wooden creature. The boy moved with increasing confidence across the structure, his balance sure, his hands certain in their tasks. Elias visited less frequently but always brought something useful: hinges fashioned from leather for the door, beeswax for sealing wood against moisture, knowledge about local plants for eating and medicine. Each visit ended the same way, with the hermit surveying progress, nodding approval, then disappearing into the forest without ceremony. The boy's mother's garden flourished in the summer heat, volunteer plants now joined by intentional crops. Each morning he took time to water and weed the small plot, finding unexpected peace in these moments of quiet tending. Occasionally he found himself talking to the plants as his mother once had, telling them about his day's building plans, encouraging their growth. Dark clouds gathered over the western peaks with unnatural speed, piling high like a wall of bruised flesh. The boy noticed the sudden silence first. Birds had stopped calling, insects fallen quiet. Even the breeze died, leaving the air unnaturally still and heavy. His skin prickled with awareness. A mountain storm was coming, not the gentle summer rains that had fallen occasionally, but something fiercer, more dangerous. From his position on the roof frame, he could see the approaching weather clearly. The cabin's structure was vulnerable. Walls completed but the roof only half covered with lighter support beams. If wind struck now, weeks of work could be destroyed in minutes. He scrambled down, mind racing through options. No time to complete proper roofing. He needed an emergency solution. The oiled hides and tarps he'd prepared for later use might serve as temporary covering if he could secure them quickly enough. Working frantically, he gathered every available hide, tarp, and piece of oiled cloth. Using a system of ropes, threaded through grommets, he'd punched in the material edges. He began lashing the coverings across the exposed roof frame. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, tying knots that would hold against wind without damaging the underlying structure. The first fat raindrop struck his face as he secured the final corner. Thunder boomed, so close it seemed to vibrate through the foundation stones. Ducking inside his nearly completed home, he immediately began reinforcing the temporary roof from below, using poles to prop up areas where water might collect and tear the coverings. The storm hit with full fury minutes later. Wind screamed around the cabin corners, seeking entrance through every tiny gap. Rain hammered against the hide coverings, which sagged but held. Inside, the boy moved constantly, adjusting props, tightening ropes where possible, dealing with small leaks as they developed. A blinding flash and simultaneous crack of thunder marked a lightning strike, terrifyingly close. The boy felt it through the soles of his feet, a surge of energy through the ground itself. The strike was followed by a tremendous crashing sound from just beyond his garden. For hours, the storm raged. Water found its way through the hastily constructed covering, creating puddles on the dirt floor. Wind tore one section of hide free, requiring an emergency repair in lashing rain. Yet the core structure, his carefully joined walls and main roof beams, remained solid, tested by nature and proving worthy. When dawn finally came, the storm had moved eastward, leaving behind a transformed landscape. Stepping outside, the boy's eyes were immediately drawn to the lightning's aftermath. A massive pine, easily 100 years old, had stood sentinel near his garden since before his family's arrival. Now it lay split and smoking, its great trunk cleaved by the direct strike, wood splinters scattered across 30 yards. Moving closer, he examined the fallen giant with respect, bordering on awe. The lightning had carved a spiral pattern down the trunk, exposing inner wood in a way no human tool could replicate. The destruction was terrible, yet beautiful, nature's power displayed in raw form. Returning to assess his cabin, he found damage less severe than feared. The temporary covering had performed remarkably well, though it would need to be replaced with proper roofing soon. Several wall sections showed water staining, and one window frame had warped slightly from moisture. All fixable. Elias arrived before midday, picking his way along debris-strewn paths. "Saw the lightning from my place," the old man said, eyeing the split tree. "Thought it might have hit your cabin directly." Together they examined the fallen pine. Elias ran weathered hands along the lightning's path, feeling the texture of the spiral groove burned into the wood. "This is rare," he said quietly. "Lightning-marked wood has power in it, according to the old ones. Traditional to use it for special purposes." He looked meaningfully at the cabin. "A center beam marked by lightning brings protection." The boy understood immediately. The fallen pine, though damaged, contained sections of sound timber. The lightning's decorative spiral could become a feature rather than a flaw, a story built into the very structure of his home. For 3 days they worked together to harvest usable sections from the lightning-struck pine. The wood required special care in cutting and moving, heavy with moisture and still occasionally smoking from internal heat. Using ropes and leverage, they managed to transport several key pieces to the cabin site. The most perfect section, a length of trunk nearly 8 feet long with the lightning spiral clearly visible along its length, was designated for a special purpose. It would become the center support beam for the main living space, a vertical column connecting floor to roof peak. "Position it so the spiral can be seen," Elias advised. "Let it tell its story." Installing the lightning-marked beam became a ceremony of sorts. The boy prepared the wood carefully, preserving the natural pattern while ensuring structural integrity. When ready, he positioned it precisely in the cabin's center, securing it to foundation below and ridge beam above. The spiral pattern caught the light, seeming to twist upward like frozen energy. That night, another light rain fell, gentler than the great storm. Inside his cabin, the boy sat with his back against the lightning beam, feeling oddly comforted by its presence. The wood seemed to hum faintly with contained energy, a reminder that he had not conquered nature, but had learned to work with its forces, incorporating even its most destructive aspects into his creation. The cedar split cleanly along its grain under careful pressure from his handmade wedges. Thin, flat sections peeled away like pages from a book, creating perfect shingles for the roof. The boy examined each piece critically, setting aside those with knots or irregular grain. Only the best would protect his home from mountain weather. Shingle making had become his primary task as summer's heat intensified. Working in the shade of a makeshift awning, he developed a steady rhythm, positioned the log section, placed the wedge, tap precisely with his mallet, pry gently, repeat. His growing pile of shingles represented weeks of patient labor, each piece hand-split and inspected. The roof structure itself was complete, rafters secured to ridge beam, cross supports in place. Now came the more intricate challenge of covering it properly. His father's journal provided detailed instructions on traditional shingle laying with overlapping patterns that would shed water efficiently. Start from the bottom edge, the journal advised. Each layer covers the seams of the one below. Moving these materials up to roof level presented a new problem. The boy's slight frame struggled with the awkward bundles of shingles. After several frustrating attempts that left shingles scattered across the ground, he paused to reconsider his approach. The solution came from studying ants carrying loads many times their size up vertical surfaces. He created a simple pulley system using rope through a notched beam extending from the roof peak. This allowed him to haul bundles of shingles upward while he climbed unencumbered. His first day on the roof proved challenging. Finding secure footing on the pitched surface required constant vigilance. He fashioned a safety rope around his waist, anchored to the ridge beam, a precaution his father would have insisted upon. Even so, moving across the angled surface remained nerve-wracking. Beginning at the lowest edge, he placed the first row of shingles. Each needed to be positioned precisely, secured with wooden pegs he'd carved during winter evenings. The work proceeded slowly, each shingle requiring individual attention. By sunset, only a small section was completed, but the pattern emerging gave him satisfaction. This would work. Days blended together as the roofing continued. The boy established a routine, splitting shingles in morning shade, hauling them up during midday, securing them in place through the afternoon. His hands grew increasingly skilled, able to feel almost instinctively when a shingle was placed correctly. Disaster struck on the fourth day. While reaching for a bundle of shingles, his foot slipped on a dew-dampened rafter. The safety rope caught him, but not before his leg twisted painfully beneath him. The fall left him dangling awkwardly, his right ankle already swelling. Carefully, he pulled himself back onto the roof and then down to ground level. The ankle wasn't broken but badly sprained. Walking became a painful challenge, climbing impossible. Roof work would have to wait. Frustration nearly overwhelmed him that evening as he soaked the injury in the cool spring water. Weeks of delay meant risking exposure to early fall rains. Yet climbing was impossible in his condition. The solution came through necessity's invention. Using salvaged lumber, he created a sliding seat that could be pulled up his pulley system. This contraption allowed him to sit securely on the roof, scooting along the rafters while keeping weight off his injured ankle. Progress slowed dramatically, but didn't stop entirely. Elias found him this way 3 days later, stubbornly securing shingles while seated in his improvised chair. Resourceful, the old man commented, examining the contraption. Your grandfather would approve. The hermit stayed for 2 days, helping with the most difficult sections. His gnarled hands worked with surprising speed, placing and securing shingles with practiced efficiency. Together, they completed nearly half the roof. You'll manage the rest, Elias said upon departing. Ankle looks better already. Alone again, the boy continued his methodical progress. As his ankle healed, he gradually abandoned the sliding seat in favor of careful movement across the increasingly shingled surface. Each completed section brought both satisfaction and momentum, the visible progress encouraging him to push harder. The day he placed the final row of shingles along the ridge was momentous. Standing carefully at the peak, he could see the entire valley spread before him, the view now rightfully earned. Below, his handiwork formed a solid barrier between sky and living space. Thousands of individual pieces joined to create protection. That evening brought the first test, a sudden summer shower that darkened the western sky and swept across the valley. Inside his now roofed home, the boy listened intently as raindrops drummed against cedar. Water slid smoothly down the overlapping shingles, channeled precisely as designed. Only 2 small leaks appeared, easily marked for later repair. The sound of rain on his own roof brought unexpected emotion. This percussion, this proof of shelter, represented crossing a threshold from survival to living. No longer would he be at the mercy of elements. The roof above had transformed the space below into something sacred. Home. With the major exterior work complete, he added a final crucial element, a smoke hole with adjustable cover at the roof peak, positioned to draw properly regardless of wind direction. His father's journal had devoted several pages to this essential feature, and the boy followed the instructions precisely. That night, he built his first proper indoor fire. Smoke rose cleanly through the new opening, drawn by natural convection. Warmth filled the space as flames cast dancing shadows across newly sheltered walls. Outside, rain continued to fall harmlessly against cedar shingles, the sound now comforting rather than threatening. In his journal he wrote simply, "Roof complete, fire draws well, rain stays outside where it belongs." While clearing debris from what would become his storage area, the boy's shovel struck something solid beneath the dirt floor. Careful digging revealed a small pit lined with stones, a root cellar his family had used for preserving vegetables. Inside, protected from fire and elements, lay his mother's loom. The wooden frame was partially damaged, several beams charred and warped, but the essential structure remained, along with a tangle of threads still stretched between the heddles. His mother had spent countless evenings at this loom, weaving cloth from wool traded with valley farmers. The rhythmic clack of the shuttle passing back and forth had been the soundtrack of winter evenings. He lifted the loom carefully, as if handling something alive. This wasn't building material or a practical tool. This was memory given physical form. For a long moment he simply held it, feelings too complex for words washing through him. Then, with the same care he'd given to cabin construction, he began restoring the loom. Damaged parts were removed, measured, and recreated from seasoned wood. Mechanisms were cleaned, oiled with rendered fat, tested for smooth operation. When a piece was beyond his skill to reproduce, he improvised, adapting the design while maintaining function. The loom restoration became his evening project, while days were devoted to interior walls. Using split logs with the flat sides facing inward, he created smooth surfaces that would reflect firelight and hold heat. Each log required careful fitting, chinking with moss and clay to seal against drafts. His father's journal had emphasized the importance of proper insulation in mountain winters. Cold finds every gap one entry warm. The boy took this lesson seriously, meticulously filling even the smallest spaces between logs with insulating material. The floor presented different challenges. The packed earth served adequately, but retained moisture and dust. Following traditional methods detailed in the journal, he created a floor of puncheons, logs split in half, with the flat side up, the rounded side set into the dirt. Each piece required careful arging to create a reasonably level surface, then sanding with rough stones to reduce splinters. Installing these heavy floor sections alone tested his strength and ingenuity. He developed a rolling system using round branches as bearings, allowing him to position each massive puncheon precisely before setting it permanently. The work was slow but rewarding, each completed section bringing the interior closer to the home he envisioned. As summer began its gradual surrender to autumn, the boy's focus shifted to creating essential furniture. A bed frame came first. Simple but sturdy, constructed from straight pine with joinery techniques he'd perfected on the cabin itself. The mattress would be pine boughs layered with deer hide, a vast improvement over his current bedding on the ground. Throughout these interior improvements, the loom remained his special project. Unlike the purely functional aspects of building, the loom's restoration connected him to something beyond survival. Each evening he worked on it by firelight, measuring, fitting, adjusting. The delicate work improved his overall craftsmanship, teaching patience and precision that benefited all aspects of construction. The day Elias appeared with metal hinges was a revelation. The hermit had journeyed to a distant settlement, trading honey and furs for these precious manufactured items. "Can't have a proper door without proper hinges," he explained, handing over the iron pieces. "Your father would have done the same for me." The gift transformed the cabin's entrance. Unlike leather hinges that would wear quickly, these metal fittings would last generations. Together, they installed the hinges on the door frame the boy had prepared, testing the swing repeatedly until it moved smoothly. The door itself, crafted from thick planks reinforced with cross braces, settled into place with satisfying solidity. For the first time, the boy could truly close his home to the outside world, creating a space entirely his own. That night, with door secured and fire burning in the central hearth pit, the boy made a decision. Though the cabin interior remained unfinished, it had reached a point of basic comfort and security. He dismantled his temporary shelter in the corner, the lean-to that had protected him through winter and construction, and moved his bedding to the newly framed bed. Sleep came quickly, the day's labor having thoroughly exhausted him. Yet sometime in deepest night, he woke suddenly, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar comfort. Moonlight filtered through the hide-covered window, casting soft light across the puncheon floor. The restored loom stood in the corner, its silhouette familiar yet changed by his work. For the first time since beginning his project, he allowed himself to truly feel what he had accomplished. This space, created by his own hands from materials the mountain provided, was more than shelter. It was continuation. It was honoring those lost while building something new. It was transformation of grief into purpose. Rolling to his side on the surprisingly comfortable bed frame, the boy noticed something he'd been too exhausted to see earlier. The moonlight passing through the window at just the right angle cast the shadow of his mother's restored loom across the floor. The pattern of frame and strings created a delicate tracery that seemed almost alive, moving slightly with the fire's dying ember. "I've brought it back," he whispered to the empty room that somehow didn't feel empty at all. "I've brought you back too." The antler felt smooth beneath his fingers as he carefully carved the intricate shape of a door latch. He had found the shed deer antler while gathering the last harvest from his small garden, a gift from the forest that seemed meant for this purpose. Working with small, precise cuts, he shaped the natural curve into a functional piece that would also be beautiful. Autumn had returned to the mountain, painting the surrounding forest in fiery hues of red and gold. A full year had passed since he stood before the ruins of his family's cabin. Now, as he worked on the final details of his new home, he marveled at the transformation, both of the structure and himself. The garden his mother had tended, and which he had reclaimed in spring, had produced surprisingly well through summer. Now he harvested the last of the beans, squash, and root vegetables, storing them carefully in the rebuilt root cellar beneath the cabin floor. Each plant pulled from the soil represented learning about growing cycles, about patience, about providing for oneself. His body had grown stronger, leaner, taller. Clothes that had once fit now strained at shoulders and rose above ankles. His hands, once soft with childhood, had developed calluses and surprising strength. Looking at his reflection in the spring's still water, he sometimes barely recognized himself. The cabin exterior was complete. Walls solidly built, roof secure against coming winter, door and windows functional. He had sealed the exterior with a mixture of pine resin and bear fat that Elias had taught him to prepare, making the logs resistant to moisture and decay. The natural golden color of the wood had deepened to amber under this treatment, glowing warmly in afternoon sunlight. Inside, the transformation continued. The puncheon floor was finished, smoothed by weeks of use and regular oiling with the same mixture used outside. Wall chinking had been meticulously completed, every gap filled with insulating moss and clay. He had built a proper stone hearth and chimney, following his father's detailed journal instructions, creating a safe place for the central fire that would heat the home through winter. The door latch represented one of the final elements, a way to secure his home when needed. The antler's natural curve formed a perfect handle, while the carved end would catch on a wooden receptacle mounted to the door frame, not a lock in the traditional sense, but a solid closure that would keep out wind and wildlife. As he worked the final details of the carving, his mind wandered through the seasons past, the desperate winter shelter, spring's first wall raising, summer's roof completion, and now autumn's finishing touches. The cycle had come full circle. Wood tells its own story, his father had often said. The boy understood this now in ways he couldn't have before. Each piece of his cabin contained narrative. The lightning-struck center post, with its spiral pattern, the flood-delivered ridge beam, the carefully split shingles, and now this antler latch. Together they formed not just a structure but a chronicle of his journeys. The latch complete, he carried it to the door and fitted it carefully into pre-drilled holes. The mechanism worked smoothly, the carved catch engaging perfectly with its wooden receiver. He opened and closed the door several times, testing the action, making small adjustments until satisfied. Standing back, he viewed his home with critical eyes. No longer did he see only what remained to be done, but what had been accomplished. The cabin was smaller than the original family home, better positioned on higher ground, built with techniques improved through experience and necessity. It would never be exactly what was lost, but it had become something uniquely his own. A sound from the forest edge drew his attention. Two figures emerged from the trees. Elias, as expected for his occasional visits, but accompanied by a stranger. The newcomer was a young man perhaps a few years older than himself, dressed in the practical clothing of valley settlements. "Hope we're not intruding," Elias called as they approached. "Wanted you to meet Thomas. He's from the settlement downriver." The visitor stepped forward, eyes moving appreciatively over the cabin. "Heard rumors about a boy building alone in the high valley. Thought it was tall tales until Elias confirmed it." He extended his hand. "Impressive work." The simple compliment from an outsider struck the boy unexpectedly deeply. Until this moment, his accomplishment had been private, measured only against necessity and his father's instructions. To have it acknowledged by someone with no connection to him brought a different kind of satisfaction. "We brought supplies," Thomas continued, gesturing to his pack. "Settlement folks were curious. Sent coffee, salt, some tools that might help." He smiled slightly. "And news, if you're interested in hearing what's happening beyond these mountains." That evening, the three sat around his hearth fire, sharing a meal of venison and late vegetables. Thomas spoke of valley happenings, news of settlements growing, trading routes expanding, seasons that had been kind to farmers. The outside world, which had seemed irrelevant during the boy's focused building, suddenly existed again in his awareness. After Thomas had gone to sleep on a pallet near the fire, Elias stepped outside with the boy into the crisp autumn air. "People know about you now," the old man said quietly. "Word spreads. You'll have more visitors likely." The boy considered this, looking back at his completed home with the antler latch, catching moonlight. "I don't mind," he said finally. "The cabin feels ready for it." Elias nodded, understanding the deeper meaning. "It's not just shelter anymore, is it?" "No," the boy agreed. "It's become home." The carved wooden sign took shape beneath his knife. Simple letters spelling welcome, framed by mountain peaks and pine branches. He worked the soft cedar with practiced ease, each cut precise and deliberate. This would hang beside his door, the first thing visitors would see upon approaching his cabin. Thomas had returned 3 times since that first autumn visit, each time bringing supplies, news, and increasing interest from the settlement. Word had spread about the mountain boy who had built a home alone after losing his family. Some viewed it as merely a curious tale, others as something approaching legend. "They're asking about you," Thomas explained during his latest visit. "The settlement council specifically. Winter's coming on hard and fast this year. They've sent me to invite you to winter with us." The invitation hung in the air, unexpected and complicated. The boy set down his carving knife. Considering the offer, the settlement lay 3 days' journey downstream, a collection of cabins, a trading post, a small community of perhaps 30 families. Safety, company, connection to the wider world. You'd have a place with my family, Thomas continued. My parents have extra rooms since my brothers moved to their own homesteads. Plenty of food stored for winter. You wouldn't be a burden. Elias, who had arrived the previous day with his own warnings about the coming winter, remained silent by the fire, his weathered face unreadable. The cabin is solid now, the boy said finally, built to withstand mountain winters. No doubt, Thomas acknowledged. But a harsh winter alone is different from one with company, with people who could become friends, even family in time. The words struck deeper than Thomas could know. Family. The concept had become abstract, existing only in memory and the objects the boy had salvaged. His father's journal, his mother's restored loom, his grandfather's measuring stick. Could I think about it, he asked. Stay one more night. That evening, after Thomas had retired to the guest pallet, Elias and the boy sat outside under stars sharp with approaching winter cold. You don't need my counsel on this, the hermit said after a long silence. You've earned the right to choose your own path. But you lived alone by choice, the boy pointed out. For decades. Elias nodded slowly. I did. Still do. But my solitude came after years among people. I knew what I was choosing, what I was leaving. His eyes, reflecting starlight, turned to the boy. You've had solitude forced upon you before, experiencing its alternative. The decision kept the boy awake long into the night. The cabin he had built with his hands felt alive around him, holding memories and achievements within its walls. Leaving, even temporarily, felt like abandonment. Yet the thought of voices, of shared meals, of learning from others rather than just from necessity and old journals, pulled at something deep within him. Morning brought clarity. As Thomas prepared for departure, the boy made his choice. I'll stay, he said simply. This winter at least. This is my home now. Thomas looked disappointed but nodded respect. The invitation remains open. Any time conditions get too harsh, or you simply want company, you're welcome. After Thomas departed with promises to return when weather allowed, the boy felt a curious mixture of relief and doubt. Had he made the right choice? The cabin suddenly seemed quieter than before, the silence more noticeable for having been briefly interrupted by another voice. The welcome sign, half completed on his workbench, caught his eye. He had begun it before Thomas's invitation, some instinct already pushing him toward connection rather than continued isolation. Despite his decision to remain, he returned to the carving, finishing the detailed border of mountain peaks. Not closing doors, he explained to Elias, just choosing which ones to open and when. The old hermit, preparing for his own return journey home, smiled faintly. Wisdom beyond your years. In the days that followed Thomas's departure, the boy found himself making unexpected preparations. He cleared a space in the cabin's main room, creating an area specifically for guests. Using newly acquired carpentry skills, he built a proper bed frame, rather than just a pallet for this space, complete with a mattress stuffed with dried grasses and soft pine needles. The cooking area expanded as well. New shelves appeared, designed to hold extra provisions and dishes. The single bench by the fire became two, then a small table constructed from a cross-section of a large pine, its surface sanded smooth and oiled to a soft glow. These changes weren't conscious contradiction of his decision to remain alone. Rather, they represented evolving understanding of what his home could be. Not just personal shelter, but potentially a gathering place, a center for connection when he chose it. The welcome sign, completed and hung beside his door, symbolized this shift. It faced outward toward the path leading from the valley, visible to anyone approaching. Its presence didn't obligate him to constant company, but it opened the possibility, extending invitation on his terms. That evening, he cooked a simple meal of venison stew. The first fert, he set 2 bowls on his new table, filling both. The second remained untouched. Of course, there was no guest expected. Yet something about the gesture felt right, an acknowledgement that while he chose solitude for now, he was no longer defined by it. In his journal entry that night he wrote, "Hung welcome sign today, built guest bed and table, chose to stay for winter, but preparing for visitors when spring comes. The cabin feels different now, still mine, but ready for more." Outside, the first snow began to fall, dusting the roof he had built with his own hands. The welcome sign collected a delicate frosting of white, its message temporarily hidden but waiting to emerge when the time was right. The stone hearth radiated steady warmth through the cabin, its carefully constructed chimney drawing smoke cleanly upward into the winter sky. Unlike the rudimentary fire pit of his first winter shelter, this was a proper heart for the home, constructed with knowledge gleaned from his father's journal and weeks of patient labor. Outside, snow lay deep across the valley, transforming the familiar landscape into something magical and strange. Inside, the boy added another log to the fire, watching as flames licked around the seasoned wood. The hearth stones, gathered from the river and fitted with painstaking precision, had become the focal point of his daily life as winter settled over the mountain. This second winter was entirely different from the first. Where before he had merely survived in a makeshift shelter, now he lived comfortably in a home of his own creation. The walls held against bitter winds, the roof shed snow efficiently, and the stone hearth provided both warmth and a place to cook proper meals. He had developed new skills as well, using techniques Elias had demonstrated. He created a Dutch oven from clay, found near the spring, firing it to surprising hardness in the heart of his hearth fire. With this, he could bake bread from the small store of flour Thomas had brought on his last visit, before the mountain passes became impassable. The smell of a fresh loaf now filled the cabin, making his mouth water in anticipation. Cooking had become more than mere sustenance. It provided creative satisfaction similar to building, with more immediate rewards. A scratching at the door interrupted his thought. Opening it cautiously, he found Elias standing in knee-deep snow, beard and eyebrows frosted white, pack crusted with ice. "Blizzard's coming," the hermit said without preamble. Started toward the settlement, but saw the signs. Your cabin was closer. He stamped snow from his boots. "Mind company for a few days." The boy welcomed him in with genuine pleasure. Though he'd chosen solitude over Thomas's invitation to winter in the settlement, Elias's presence was different, a connection to his past and the mountains themselves rather than to the outside world. Together they brought in extra firewood from the covered stack beside the cabin, preparing for what might be days of confinement. The old man examined the hearth with approving eyes, testing the draft by holding a feather near the smoke shelf to confirm proper airflow. "Good construction," he noted. "Your father would be proud of this work." As predicted, the blizzard descended by nightfall. Wind howled around the cabin corners, seeking entry through any overlooked gap, but finding few vulnerabilities. Snow piled against the walls and windows, creating an insulating blanket that actually helped retain interior warmth. Inside, the two shared a meal of venison stew and fresh bread, the contrast between howling storm and cozy shelter, making the simple food seem like a feast. "The hearth is the heart of any mountain home," Elias observed, extending his hands toward the fire. "Not just for warmth and cooking, but for gathering, for stories." He glanced at the boy. "Your grandfather understood that. This hearth design is similar to the one he built in his first cabin." The mention sparked curiosity. "You knew my grandfather's first cabin?" Elias nodded, settling back on the bench. "Helped build it, same as I helped with yours. Different valley, rougher construction. Times were harder then." His eyes grew distant with memory. He came to these mountains running from something, never said what. Found peace here instead. Through the long evening, as wind voices sang around the cabin eaves, Elias shared stories the boy had never heard. Tales of his grandfather's early days in the mountains, of his father's childhood adventures, of mountain traditions and forgotten skill. The hearth fire, cast dancing shadows across the walls as history unfolded through the old man's words. Your family has roots deep in these slopes, Elias concluded. 3 generations shaped by the same forests, streams, seasons. That's rare in a world where most folks drift with the wind. The blizzard lasted 3 days. During daylight hours, they worked on small projects, the boy learning to carve delicate wooden spoons under Elias's guidance, the old man repairing snowshoes and teaching the technique. Evenings brought more stories around the hearth fire, filling the cabin with voices and laughter that had been absent since the family's loss. On the 3rd night, as the storm's fury finally began to subside, the boy had a dream so vivid it seemed more visitation than imagination. His parents sat with him by the hearth, his mother's hand gentle on his shoulder, his father's eyes proud as they surveyed the cabin he had built. No words passed between them, yet understanding flowed like the warmth from the stones. They approved. They were at peace. They were part of this place now, their knowledge living on through his hands and the home he had created. He woke to find his face wet with tears, but they weren't the bitter tears of grief. Something had shifted, healed, transformed. The hearthstone still radiated warmth in the pre-dawn darkness. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving pristine snow and star-filled silence. Elias departed the following morning, snowshoeing back toward his own cabin, now that conditions allowed safe travel. The boy stood in the doorway watching until the hermit's figure disappeared among snow-laden pines. Returning inside, he added wood to the banked hearth fire, watching flames spring back to eager life. The cabin felt different after these days of company, not emptier with Elias gone, but somehow fuller, as if the stories shared had become part of the walls themselves. He added an entry to his growing journal. Blizzard brought Elias for 3 days. Hearth held strong against the cold. Learned spoon carving and family history. Dreamt of parents by the fire. A good dream, finally. Outside his window, winter would hold the mountains in its grip for weeks yet. But within his walls, surrounded by the warmth of his stone hearth, the boy had found something that transcended seasonal cold, connection to past and future, to family lost and friends present, to a legacy built by his own hands, stone by careful stone. Spring sunlight streamed through the eastern window, illuminating the boy's hands as he worked. With his finest chisel, one Thomas had brought from the settlement, he carefully carved the final lines of his family portrait into the main support beam. The likenesses were simple, but unmistakable. His father's strong profile, his mother's gentle smile, his younger sister's playful stance. He had worked on this memorial for weeks, adding details during quiet evenings by firelight. The cabin had evolved beyond mere shelter, becoming truly his home. With the heavy work of construction complete, he now focused on the finishing touches that transformed functional space into something personal and beautiful. The carved family portrait was the most meaningful of these embellishments, not just decoration but testimony. Setting down his chisel, he ran his fingers over the completed carving. The wood grain enhanced the figures, giving them dimension and life. He had positioned the portrait at eye level, where he would see it daily, not as a reminder of loss, but as acknowledgement of continuity. His family remained present in the skills they had taught, the values they had instilled, the home he had created from their legacy. Outside, the mountain spring advanced rapidly. Snow retreated up the slopes, revealing new growth beneath. The garden area, which had lain dormant through winter, now demanded attention. Following his mother's seasonal rhythms, he prepared the soil, enriching it with hardest from his winter waste pile. Around the cabin's perimeter, he transplanted wildflowers his mother had particularly loved, columbine, lupine, and wild roses gathered from meadows as they emerged from snow. These plantings were pure sentiment, rather than practicality, transforming the cabin's immediate surroundings into a living tribute. "Your mother would approve," Elias commented, arriving for one of his increasingly frequent visits. The hermit carried a small bundle wrapped in deerskin. "Brought something for your garden." Inside were seedlings of herbs, rarely found in the wild, cultivated varieties Elias had maintained for decades near his own cabin. Rosemary, thyme, mint, and others the boy recognized from his mother's cooking. These should grow well here, the old man explained, helping to plant them in a specially prepared bed near the cabin's southern wall. Good protection from wind, plenty of sun. The boy worked alongside him, hands in the fresh earth, absorbing another layer of knowledge. My mother would trade for herbs from the valley, he recalled. Said they never grew as well as she hoped. Elias nodded. Mountain growing is different, needs different care. He demonstrated specific techniques for each plant, how deeply to set roots, how to protect tender shoots from late frosts, how to encourage spreading without invasion. As they worked, the boy noticed someone approaching from the valley path. Thomas, accompanied by a younger boy, perhaps 12 years old. They carried packs and moved with purpose, rather than the casual gait of a social visit. Brought my brother Nathan, Thomas explained upon arriving. He's interested in learning building techniques. Thought you might show him what you've accomplished here. He glanced at the cabin with genuine admiration. People in the settlement still talk about it. Some don't believe a boy built this alone. Not entirely alone, the boy corrected, nodding toward Elias. Had good teachers. He extended his hand to Nathan. Welcome. The young visitor's eyes widened as he entered the cabin, taking in the craftsmanship, the carefully joined logs, the stone hearth, the carved details. You really made all this. Over time, the boy acknowledged. Started small, learned as I went. Thomas set his pack on the table. Father sent tools for your help, and mother packed preserves. He produced jars of valley fruits, luxuries unavailable in the mountain heights. The arrangement developed naturally. Nathan would stay for several weeks, learning basic carpentry and mountain skills. In exchange, the boy would receive manufactured goods from the settlement, items he couldn't produce himself, but that would enhance his home and life. That afternoon, he showed Nathan his workshop area, explaining the progression of his building knowledge. The younger boy proved an eager student, asking intelligent questions and handling tools with natural aptitude. Teaching what he had learned forced the boy to articulate knowledge that had become instinctive, deepening his own understanding in the process. After Thomas departed, promising to return for his brother later in spring, the 3 remaining inhabitants settled into a comfortable routine. Mornings were spent on practical skills, building, gardening, tool maintenance. Afternoons often involved exploration, with the boy showing Nathan his favorite spots in the surrounding forests and teaching wildlife recognition. Evenings brought them together around the hearth, where Elias shared mountain lore and history with both boys. The cabin felt different with 3 occupants, livelier, somehow smaller yet more complete. The guest bed and expanded table, created months earlier in anticipation of visitors, now served their intended purpose. The welcome sign by the door no longer seemed aspirational, but practical. One evening, as Nathan practiced simple carving techniques under his guidance, the boy realized how much he had changed. From the desperate, grieving child standing before ruins, he had become not just a builder, but a teacher, passing on knowledge as his father and Elias had done for him. You've created something remarkable here, Elias observed privately later that night, as Nathan slept. Not just the cabin itself, but what it represents. A center, a continuation. The boy nodded. Understand. The physical structure, impressive as it might be, was only part of his achievement. The greater accomplishment lay in transforming isolation into connection, grief into growth, ending into beginning. That night, he added to his journal, Nathan is learning quickly, shows talent, with carving tools, transplanted mother's favorite flowers today, and Elias's herbs, finished the family portrait on the main beam. The cabin feels complete now, not because building has ended, but because it has found its purpose. Outside, spring winds carried the scent of pine and new growth through the valley. Inside, the carved family watched over three figures gathered by firelight, past and present connected through the home. A boy had built with his own hand. The leather-bound journal lay open on the table, its blank pages waiting. Unlike his father's weathered notebook that had guided him through the building process, this one was new, crafted by his own hands from deer hide, tanned over winter months. He had stitched it carefully, creating a cover that would protect the knowledge he now felt compelled to record. 2 years had passed since he first stood before the ruins of his family cabin. Now, on a perfect summer evening, he sat on the porch he had added this spring, watching golden light play across the valley. The cabin rose behind him, no longer a desperate shelter, but a beautiful home that drew admiring visitors from settlements near and far. Word of his achievement had spread beyond the mountains. Twice in recent months, families had journeyed specifically to see the cabin the boy built and to learn his techniques for working with local materials. He had shown them through his home with quiet pride, explaining methods discovered through necessity and refined through practice. On the table beside his new journal sat sketches for a workshop edition, a space dedicated to woodworking and teaching. Nathan had returned for a second summer of learning, bringing two friends equally eager to acquire mountain building skills. The boy, though at 16 that term hardly seemed appropriate anymore, found unexpected satisfaction in sharing his knowledge. Taking up his carefully shaped writing stick and homemade ink, he began the first entry in his own journal. There are things worth recording about building in these mountains. Methods not found in valley construction techniques my father taught me, that Elias shared, that I discovered through trial. This knowledge should continue beyond my own hand. The writing flowed easily, detailing specific approaches to foundation work in mountain terrain, methods for selecting and preparing local timber, techniques for natural weatherproofing using pine resin and animal fat. He included small sketches alongside the text, illustrations that would make the instructions clearer for future readers. As sunset painted the distant peaks copper and gold, a small gathering assembled in the clearing before his cabin. Elias arrived first, his visits now regular, rather than occasional. Thomas and his family followed, bringing food for the community meal that had become tradition on midsummer evening. Several families from the settlement completed the group, along with two newcomers, a young couple seeking land of their own in the mountain valleys. Tables had been arranged in front of the cabin, laden with shared dishes, venison, trout from the stream, bread baked in settlement ovens, vegetables from multiple gardens including his own. The boy, young man, truly welcomed each arrival, comfortable now in his role as host, rather than solitary survivor. As twilight deepened, lanterns were lit and stories began, tales of mountain life, of building successes and failures, of wildlife encounters and weather challenges. The gathering had evolved over seasons from curiosity about the mountain boy to genuine community, connections forged through shared experience and mutual respect. Later, as fireflies appeared and younger children dozed against parents' shoulders, conversation turned to the future. The newcomer couple asked careful questions about suitable building sites, about water sources and natural shelters. "You should talk with him," Thomas said, nodding toward the cabin's builder. "No one knows these valleys better now, not even Elias." The hermit chuckled agreement. The student has surpassed the teacher. Finding himself suddenly the focus of attention, he spoke with careful consideration. "There's a protected hollow 2 ridges east. Good water, natural windbreak, southern exposure, soils rich enough for growing." He paused, then added, "I could show you, help you start right." The offer emerged without premeditation, yet felt absolutely correct. An extension of what his home had become. Not just his private sanctuary, but a center from which knowledge and community radiated out. As the gathering dispersed into the summer night, he remained on the porch, watching stars appear above familiar peaks. Elias lingered, settling into the adjacent chair with a contented sigh. "Your family would be proud," the old man said after comfortable silence. Not just of the cabin itself, of what you've created beyond wood and stone. He nodded, understanding the deeper meaning. The physical structure had been only the beginning. The true building had been of connections, purpose, identity, transforming a broken boy into someone with knowledge worth sharing and a place at the center of an expanding circle. Later, alone in the cabin illuminated by a single candle, he completed his first journal entry. A home is more than shelter. It's the physical expression of who we are and what we value. Building mine taught me this. With patience, persistence, and willingness to learn from both success and failure, we can create beauty from brokenness. This journal begins as mine, but I hope it continues beyond me. Knowledge passed down like my father's before it. The mountain provides materials, our hands provide shape, but community gives meaning. He closed the journal carefully, running his hand over the smooth leather cover. Outside his window, moonlight silvered the valley he now knew intimately, in all seasons. Inside, the cabin settled with familiar creaks and whispers, a living entity of sorts, shaped by his hands but now shaping his life in return. On the main support beam, the carved family portrait caught the candlelight, figures seeming to move slightly in the flickering glow. He had carved his own likeness beside them last winter, no longer the child who had stood before ruins, but the young man who had built a beautiful home with his own hands. Setting the candle on his bedside table, he added one final log to the hearth fire. Tomorrow would bring the newcomers, seeking his guidance. Nathan and his friends eager for the day's lessons, garden work, and continued planning for the workshop edition. A full life in a home of his own making. "Good night," he whispered to the empty room that somehow wasn't empty at all. The cabin held memories and achievements, past and future, solitude and community, all bound together by the commitment of a boy who had refused to be defeated by loss.